We've done 8-bit, 16-bit, and now it's time for some 32-bit goodness. PS1, Sega Saturn, 3DO, PC, Nintendo DS. Heck, I'll even throw in some Nintendo 64 games, because where else would I put the N64? Anyway, let's get started. This is my selection of incredible 32-bit hidden gems you never played. ODT is part Tomb Raider, part RPG, and part survival horror all wrapped into one. You're on an airship delivering an important MacGuffin when you crash land in unknown territory. Now, you get to pick between 4 different characters, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and you have to rescue your crew while searching for gas to inflate your ship's balloons. The game plays a lot like Tomb Raider, complete with tank controls and precision platforming. But as you defeat enemies, you'll also gain experience points, which can be used towards improving your defense and hand-to-hand combat, as well as your weapon expertise or your magic. You'll then have to travel throughout the very large levels looking for keys and solving puzzles, but while also being on the lookout for items to upgrade your weapons or spells that you can add to your repertoire. Not only that, but the game is dark, brooding, and resources like ammo and healing items are scarce. The game is technically split into levels, but your ammo and health levels never replenish, so it's usually a good idea to conserve them as much as possible. Of course, you can also avoid fighting, but in doing that, you'll be passing up on valuable experience. I remember that this game got mediocre reviews back in the day, mostly due to its stiff controls, the extreme difficulty, and how the game doesn't really do a good job at explaining, well, anything really. It just kind of drops you into the game and expects you to know what to do. But I've always loved this game, and I feel it never got the respect it deserved. I mean, there really isn't anything quite like ODT on the PS1 or really any other 32-bit console out there. Even today, I can't really think of any game that manages to combine these 3 genres in such an interesting and unique way. And the game is super cheap too, so I say check it out if you can.
Keio Flying Squadron 2. In action! Yeah!
Keio Flying Squadron was a shmup for the Sega CD and is currently one of the rarest games on the console. The sequel, Keio 2, is a platformer for the Sega Saturn, and it's also amongst the rarest and most expensive games on the system, partly because it only ever launched in Europe and Japan. You play as Rami, a young guardian with her very own magical girl transformation, which ends up with her in a bunny outfit. And there are 2 different factions fighting who are after a secret treasure that you're supposed to be guarding. So you now have to go across some really beautiful 2D levels while jumping on enemies and picking up items like mallets, umbrellas, and giant tanuki statues and using them against your foes. Most items also have a secondary mode, like for example, the mallet is good for fighting and hitting objects, while the umbrella lets you hover in the air. Interspersed with the platforming levels are the shmup stages, and these are not bonus levels, they are full-fledged stages complete with power-ups, decent enemy variety, and creative challenges. The game also has a few anime cutscenes, and no joke, these are hilarious and would have made for a really fun 90s comedy anime series. In fact, I'm kinda surprised that nobody ever made an anime out of this, and the English voice acting is most likely the main reason why you'd want the PAL version over the Japanese original, or otherwise some of the jokes might get lost a bit. Of course, when this launched back in the day, the game was mostly ignored because 2D was considered unfashionable back then. And that's a shame too, because Keio 2 Flying Squadron deserved a lot better. So I say, check it out if you can. Septerra Core is a JRPG developed in the West for the PC. The game was created in the wake of the success of Final Fantasy VII, and even back then their marketing was all about how much the game was as good, if not better than Final Fantasy. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it is a good game. Anyway, you live in a machine world with 7 layers, and each layer has its own society. So for example, the highest layer is the most advanced one, where everything is sci-fi. Below that is your layer, a vast desert made up of people who survive by scavenging the junk from the layer above them. And below that is a medieval society. Anyway, you play as a junker named Maya, and through a series of events, you must now travel across this world and prevent a full-on war from breaking out. I really like the game's dialogue and the lore of this world, and the game is clearly inspired by Final Fantasy VII, which was a pretty rare thing for PC games in the 90s. The game also has this pre-rendered aesthetic, which in my opinion works toward its favor, as it gives it a unique art style, especially when coupled with the 90s Western artists trying to replicate anime look of this game. Combat is turn-based, and you level up, recruit new members, and buy gear as you progress through the plot. It's actually kind of interesting too, because some of your party members do not like each other, and they might actually disobey your orders and instead choose to attack each other if you pair them together. As you explore each dungeon, you can see enemies roaming the screen, similar to Chrono Trigger, meaning that if you want, you can avoid most battles. Unfortunately though, the soundtrack is pretty forgettable, and their attempts at an active time battle system could use some work, as some characters take almost a full minute to reach their turn. I'm looking at you, Robodog. And I also feel that the battles look a little plain. I mean, this is what a water spell looks like. Still, I do think that this is a very interesting take on the genre, and it's unique in the sense that it was made by Western developers and for the PC in a time when the genre was almost exclusively Japanese. And I also really like how the world feels lived in. This is a game that most old-school PC gamers are aware of, but console gamers are usually completely unaware of its existence. So I say, check it out if you can.
Look what we got here. Passage requires coin, lass.
If I refuse?
Then we'll take it from your dead carcass.
Just try it.
Shiren The Wanderer is a series of roguelike RPGs which has been on everything really, though most games never made it out of Japan, including Shiren The Wanderer 2 for the Nintendo 64. Though thankfully, the game has now been translated by fans, which is how I'm playing this. In this case, I'm using the Ozidral group translation. Anyway, you're a wandering samurai boy who comes across a village beset by Oni. As the villagers pray to their idol to save them, you happen to draw on it by mistake, and then this happens. So I guess this means you're the chosen one, or something. So now, you have to travel the mountain and look for materials that the villagers can use to build a castle so that they can be protected from the Oni. Being a traditional roguelike, the game is turn-based with the level layouts, enemies, weapons, and items all being randomized. As you fight monsters, you level up and you'll regain health by simply walking or waiting, though that can get you ambushed too. And if you die, you wake up back at the village and your stats are reset, though you can save up some money or items under certain conditions. Honestly, I really like this game. For starters, I love the art style. It kind of reminds me of Septerra Core, and I feel that this pre-rendered character art style is something that the N64 did really well, though the environments are all polygonal. And as you progress, the game is constantly forcing you to make tough decisions, as you have to decide which items or weapons you keep or throw away due to a limited inventory. And you have to do all of that while managing your health, hunger levels, and even traps or enemy positioning. If you've seen my Twitter account, you know that I can be pretty harsh on the Nintendo 64. But I feel that if we had gotten more Shiren the Wanderers in the West and fewer racing or sports games, I would probably like the system a lot more. But that's all in the past. What matters is that Shiren the Wanderer 2 is absolutely great, and it's worth checking out. Believe it or not, R-Type Delta was my introduction to this series, and man, do I love this game. And yet, I never see it being mentioned by anyone. This PS1 shmup was R-Type's foray into the polygonal world, and boy, did they get it right on the first try. Graphically, the game is stunning, with very impressive set pieces, 3 selectable ships with vastly different playstyles, and a really well-made soundtrack. I mean, just listen to this level where the music changes as you enter or leave the water. When I have selectable characters in a shmup, I usually go with the most vanilla and straightforward choices of all the options, which in this case would be the traditional R9 ship, which has all of the series' traditional power-ups. But for R-Type Delta, I always pick the RX design, which basically lets you anchor your force thingy onto the bosses and just keep hammering away at them without even having to aim. For a shmup to find alternate ship designs that I actually like, that is a rarity. Heck, I'm usually the first one to sneer at polygonal shmups, but no! Everything here, including the hit detection, is just perfect. Seriously, R-Type Delta is an unsung hero of this generation, and it deserves so much more love and respect. Check it out. If you're a 3DO fan, there's a good chance that you're already familiar with killing time. But unfortunately, the game usually seems to be treated as a joke in every other circle I've seen, with most YouTubers basically pointing and laughing at the duck enemies from the first level and then promptly giving up on it. But I'm here to tell you, those people are wrong. This game isn't just good, it's way better than I expected it to be. It's the 1930s and you're off to a remote island which was run by a rich socialite obsessed with the occult who had ties with the mafia. But when you get there, it turns out everyone is gone and their ghosts are now speaking to you. What makes this interesting is that the way this is handled reminds me a lot more of how modern first-person shooters like BioShock would handle their storytelling. Except, instead of looking for their audio diaries, you are now seeing them either talk to you or reenact past events of their lives. And the acting is...
We're expecting another shipment of arms.
Well, boss, where am I gonna put all this stuff? I mean, the storage room is almost full. I can't even walk in there.
Guess you'll just have to stash it around the grounds.
Well, I don't like it. I mean, booze was one thing, but guns, I don't know.
Quit worrying, Mike.
Well, it is what it is. Although it is cool how they give you a plot-related reason as to why you keep finding weapons and ammo around the mansion. Another cool thing is that the game does not have levels in the traditional sense. Basically, you start on one end of the island and how you explore it is up to you. This means that a lot of it is actually non-linear. So for example, the aforementioned duck level leads you into the ballroom. But if you take the time to explore, you can actually end up elsewhere and take a completely different path. It's all up to you. Every area is immense and maze-like, but thankfully, you do have a map that reveals where you've been and you can scroll it to get your bearings. Most of the weapons you get are pretty standard for the genre, like pistols and shotguns. but you do get to dual-wield pistols too, and that was pretty rare for the time. Another cool thing is how the soundtrack at times veers pretty hardcore into full-on horror. I mean, listen to this! That is some genuinely great audio design. The problem is that it's kind of undone by how silly your enemies are. I mean, giant ants, ghost maids, zombie ducks, hunters. It's all kind of silly, really. It kind of feels like the developers didn't know if they wanted a full-on horror game or a parody, so it kind of keeps going back and forth. Oh, and those ducks? Turns out if they spot you, they basically alert nearby enemies of your presence, so that's actually a really clever gameplay stealth mechanic right there. With that said, like I mentioned before, the level design is very maze-like, and it seems that each area only has a maximum of 2 enemy types, which affects variety a little bit. It also seems that, for the developers, enemy positioning just basically equates to filling the rooms with as many enemies as possible, and the frame rate does dip a little bit. But you can actually fix that one on the emulator by speeding up your processor. Yeah, turns out 3DO emulation is actually really solid and lets you easily tinker with the settings. Regardless, turns out that this game is actually a really good boomer shooter for the time, and it does not deserve the hate it gets. If anything, I feel like this game is only guilty of the crime of being on the 3DO. I say, check it out. Stellar Assault, also known as Shadow Squadron, is a polygonal space sim for the Sega 32X. You pick between one of 2 ships, and then you go on a series of missions where you basically have to destroy everything in your path. I am a big fan of 32-bit space sims like Colony Wars, and this was very impressive considering the hardware. It runs smoothly, you have a large gameplay area, the enemy capital ships are suitably large, and the game allows for a relatively large number of enemies in each level. I also like how you can destroy small segments of the large capital ships, but the remaining bulk will still be active and fighting against you. It kind of reminds me of Colony Wars Vengeance in that regard, except Colony Wars Vengeance launched nearly 4 years later. I know some of you might be looking at this and think, oh, it looks just like Star Fox. And while they are indeed very similar, the difference here is that Stellar Assault is not on rails, so you have more control over your ship. This is a pretty great 32X game that does not get talked about often enough. But if you want the real Stellar Assault experience, then you want Stellar Assault SS for the Sega Saturn. This is an enhanced port/remake of the 32X game, which features better graphics, an actual storyline, and much more varied objectives. This game only ever launched in Japan, but it was recently translated by fans. And when I say translated, I mean these people have gone beyond the extra mile. They literally hired voice actors to dub over all of the game's audio, and the dubbing is suitably 90s to fit the mood.
Really, Captain? You're gonna make him do your dirty work just because you don't feel like it?
Quiet. Captain's orders are captain's orders.
You've got the narrator, your teammates, 2 different AIs bantering between each other. There's a lot of dialogue here. Honestly, too much dialogue. Sometimes, I just wish the characters would shut up.
Hawk Feather Wing. All units stand by for jump.
Mission area coordinates confirmed. Ready when you are. All right, ready on our end, Garuda. Yes, I will. But
but that's really more of an issue with the game itself and not the translation team. Graphically, not only does the game look leagues better than the 32X version with a higher resolution, higher frame rate, and texture mapping, but I also like the art style a lot better. Your ship now has more weapons and moves at its disposal, and mission objectives are also more interesting. Now, it's not just about defeating every enemy in a level. Sometimes you gotta destroy asteroids, target specific enemies or specific points in the ship, or protect other units. It's simply an overall better experience, and the game even has multiple endings. Oh, and the music is way better too. Unfortunately though, by the time this game came out, the Saturn was pretty much on its last legs in the West, so we never got this highly impressive port. So it's a very good thing that fans took it upon themselves to fix that, and man, this game is so worth checking out. Hell Knight is a survival horror game for the PS1, developed by Atlus and published by Konami. This game only ever launched in Japan and Europe. You're in the Tokyo subway when an explosion goes off and only you and the young girl survived. So now, you two must navigate your way through the sewers and into safety. The problem is that underneath the sewers, there's an entire underground civilization of misfits, runaways, and beggars. And the hallways are also patrolled by monsters and you have no means of defense against them. Instead, you either have to run, wait for them to pass, or try to outsmart them. The game is all about dungeon exploration, solving puzzles, and finding the right items to progress. I know this might sound a little boring, but the fact you're defenseless and your view distance is so short really makes this an unnerving experience. I found myself increasing the game's volume as I kept trying to listen for footsteps or other noises that might announce that a monster is around the corner. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, there were points in this game where I was genuinely unnerved and on edge while playing this, which is a very impressive feat for a PS1 horror game. And it does not help that the way the characters talk, or even their art styles, give the game a dreamlike, or should I say, nightmarish-like atmosphere to the game. Now granted, the unnatural way everyone talks might just be an issue with the translation, but it oddly works in the game's favor. It's kind of interesting too because Hell Knight feels like a precursor to modern indie horror games like the Amnesia series, where you're defenseless and you just gotta be quick or know when to hide. And if you get hit, you'll lose the girl, which will impact future dialogues and change the ending. This is a pretty niche game, but if you're interested in a unique PS1 horror experience created by an old school Atlus, then I say check this one out. I don't think it's a controversial statement to say that the Nintendo 64 wasn't exactly famous for its shmups. But ironically, one of the better shmups for the system isn't even a full game in of itself, but really a series of game development tools to create shmups. This is Dezaimon 3D, and this series has been around since the NES days. But the N64 release goes above and beyond, letting you create your own polygonal ships, bullets, items and explosions, as well as creating your own music, backgrounds and set pieces. And the cool thing is that even if you're not interested in creating your own shmup, Dezaimon 3D already comes with 2 games included. The first one, Usagi, is honestly terrible, so we'll ignore that one. But the second one, Solid Gear, is surprisingly good, and definitely better than anything I would have expected from a pack-in game on a shmup development tool for children. It's pretty clear the developers wanted to flex the versatility of their tools, because you have cutscenes, set pieces, character dialogues, and changing angles. The game plays a lot like the Raystorm series, in that you have a regular shot, but you can also lock onto enemies, and the levels feel surprisingly epic. Like, this is actually really cool. You even have bosses with multiple parts that can be taken down individually. My only real issue with Solid Gear is that the gameplay is a little slow for a shmup. But other than that, yeah, this is surprisingly good. So I say, check it out. Bulk Slash is the poster child of hidden gems for the Sega Saturn. In fact, it gets brought up so much that I'm not even sure it can be categorized as a hidden gem anymore. So, why am I bringing it up? Because it recently received a full English translation by the same group behind Stellar Assault, complete with, once again, English voice acting.
How do you do? I am Medical Flare. Might I trouble you to tag along?
This game has been getting up there in price for a while, but now that we finally got this English release, I would go as far as to say that it made the official release superfluous. Anyway, you play as a giant mech and you have 7 levels where you walk around various cities, space locales, or giant factories, and each stage has a specific objective. This can be to take out specific targets, protect something, or drop off bombs at a specific point without letting them detonate or be destroyed. Your mech can walk in any direction or transform into an airship, which lets you cover more ground faster, and as you defeat enemies you'll pick up weapon upgrades. And I gotta say, even though the levels aren't huge per se, they are pretty large by 32-bit standards. And I love the sense of scale here, as you jump from building to building and destroy large targets and robots. Additionally, you'll also pick up different navigators who tell you where your next target is. You can only ever carry one at a time, and if you pick a new one up, you'll lose the other. As you stick around with one in particular, she'll level up, and supposedly this gives you new abilities, but I'll be honest, I never noticed anything. Still, it is cool because if you don't like one of them, you can simply change to someone else. I mean, heck, you can even get a German redhead girl on your giant mech. Wait, why does that sound familiar?
Sergeant Colin Steiner reporting in. My navigation is kind of amazing.
Wait, you're called what now? Honestly, this game is just great, and I freaking love the art style. It kind of reminds me of Mega Man Legends, which just so happens to be one of my favorite series on the PS1, and I feel that this is one of the best looking polygonal games on the Sega Saturn. So yeah, you absolutely need to pick this one up.
Shield recovered. Onwards. Shield recovered.
Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road is a JRPG for the Nintendo DS, and holy crap, I love this game! This is a turn-based JRPG based on the Wizard of Oz, and just look at it! This game is beautiful! The art style, the colors, the attention to detail, this might just be one of the best looking DS games. And the music fits the fairy tale style perfectly. Unfortunately, it also came out during a period when hating on JRPGs was the trendy thing to do. Wow! Really? Anyway, you play as Dorothy, and you've just been summoned to the land of Oz. As soon as you land, you see the great and powerful Oz, who tells you that you should go to the Emerald City and speak to him. On your way there, you'll run into the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, and the Tin Man. Now the cool thing here is that you can technically attack 4 times per turn, but some characters consume more turn slots than others. So for example, Dorothy and Scarecrow only consume 1 slot, so if you only use them, you can attack 4 turns. But the Cowardly Lion, who is more powerful, can only attack twice, and the Tin Man, who's the strongest one of them all, can only attack once per turn. So this means that you have 4 slots per turn, but not everyone takes up an equal amount of space. Not only that, but different characters are better suited for certain types of enemies. So Dorothy, for example, is better suited against ghost-style monsters, while the Cowardly Lion is good against hard-shelled enemies like crabs, and the Tin Man is best when paired up against plants. One interesting thing about Wizard of Oz is that the game is played entirely with the stylus. All of the menu screens and battle options are chosen using the stylus, and rather than moving with the D-pad, you have a virtual trackball on the bottom screen, and you have to rotate the trackball to move, and this doesn't feel great. You know those Game Dev Tycoon games where you have to select random game features for your titles and end up creating bizarre creations like a driving game with light gun controls? Yeah, that's kind of how this feels like. Ironically, playing this on an emulator might just be the best way to experience this game. Not only can you increase or decrease the resolution as per your own taste like I've been doing in this video, but you can also just control the entire game with the mouse, which is arguably more comfortable than using the stylus. I should know, I actually own this game. Anyway, this game is awesome, and I say, check it out if you can. Silent Bomber is a late release for the PS1 and it shows. Honestly, at times this game looks like it could pass for an early PS2 game. Anyway, you play as Utah, and you have the ability to teleport bombs to any place you walk onto. You use these to destroy enemies or open up pathways to help you progress through the game. Along the way, you'll pick up health items, secondary weapons, and chips which can be used to upgrade your shields, teleport range, and the amount of explosives you can teleport in a single strike. The levels typically require you either get from point A to point B, destroy all the targets in a level, or protect someone. And interspersed between stages, you have lengthy cutscenes filled with anime teenage angst. And you know what? All the late 90s and early 2000s anime angst is kind of adorable looking back at it. It's like seeing a 14-year-old kid who thinks he's cooler than he actually is. I really enjoyed the graphics from both the technical and artistic level, and these are often filled with lasers, explosions, and enemies swarming you. My only real issue with Silent Bomber is how it all takes place inside a giant spaceship, so the environments tend to look a little samey. In fact, because of this, the tutorial level ends up being the most visually interesting stage simply because it's so different from the rest of the game. But really, this game is just awesome. Check it out if you can. Battle Blues is a tactical turn-based RPG for the 3DO. The game was developed exclusively for the 3DO and also released exclusively in South Korea, where it was commissioned and published by LG of all things, who was also one of the 3DO manufacturers. In fact, it's kinda funny how much the LG logo does not fit in with your usual video game developer and publisher logos of the time. Anyway, it's the distant year of 2015 and countries no longer exist, having been replaced with city-states who are all ruled by one giant defense organization. You play as a mercenary force for this defense organization, and each chapter you're hired for a task which can span multiple levels. You then pick out your team, gear, items and ammo for each character while taking into account your budget. And you're sent out on various assignments which involve defeating all enemies, rescuing hostages, that sort of thing. This game is actually really fun to play, but it's also pretty clear the developers were pretty inexperienced. Like for example, the movement controls feel unnatural, like the D-pad positioning doesn't make sense with the angle you're viewing things from. Additionally, these are some pretty janky walk cycles. And the game is also missing some basic quality of life features like trading items and ammo between different characters. I mean, you can't even do this in the selection screen, so be sure to select who gets what very carefully. And in fact, you always have to remember to buy enough ammo for each character, or you could find yourself stuck with a character who's now defenseless. The good news is that the game is actually really fun. You have to take into account aiming angles, character stats, and experience as they level up. And at times, the missions are really interesting. Like in this stage, where you're in a hostage situation, so you have to go around the bad guy and take him out before he aims at the innocent civilians, as he'll fire on them first before focusing on you. Whenever a party member is defeated, they'll give you a dialogue like they're gone forever, but that is actually not the case. They'll be back with full health on the next mission, and friendly NPCs will join your party and become playable even if they went down during the previous mission. Oh, and at times, the music for this game kinda slaps, to be honest. Check this game out. I promise you, it's worth it. The Note is a first-person horror game for the PS1, published only in Japan and Europe by Sunsoft. You're a team of Japanese investigators who go to a mansion in Italy where some kids have gone missing. Remember earlier in this video when I compared Hell Knight to modern indie horror games like the Amnesia series? Well, The Note actually reminds me a lot more of Deadly Premonition for the Xbox 360, PS3 and Switch. There's so much intentional and unintentional jankiness here that the game is kind of hilarious, starting with the atrocious voice acting.
It's so quiet.
Yeah. No sign of anyone around. It doesn't look like anyone has lived here for a long time.
The building looks pretty old, too.
Do you think the kids were really here?
If Linda sent photos of the place, they must have been. But whether they're still around or not is a different matter.
I can't get those photos of the spirits out of my head.
But it's not just the voice acting. Even the game's dialogue and logic make no sense. Like how you're exploring an abandoned mansion and then you suddenly meet this lady just standing there out of nowhere who implies she knows where the kids are, but she will not tell you anything unless you do a favor for her and come back tomorrow. Yeah, I like how you just met this creepy lady in a creepy mansion who happens to know where the kidnapped kids are, and instead of pressing her for answers, you just go out and spend the whole day searching for a redstone instead. That is some janky writing right there. Anyway, as mentioned before, this is a first-person horror game, and it's pretty interesting that most of your controller is dedicated to creating your own shortcuts, meaning that instead of having a button dedicated to using items or a generic interact with stuff, you now need to set up a button for opening doors, another one for closing doors, for examining stuff, for using the shotgun, for reloading the shotgun, for using matches, Literally, you need a button for every item on your inventory. That is like the worst way of setting up a control scheme, and I kinda love it, to be honest. Another interesting thing is that there's no life bar or really any HUD to speak of. You won't know if you ran out of ammo until you have to reload, and you won't know if you're out of ammo cartridges until the reload stops working or you stop and check your inventory. On the other hand, this game has a pretty major mechanic with lighting, as you often need to open curtains, use matches, or turn on fireplaces to be able to see what you're doing. And as you get hurt, your field of vision becomes smaller until you can barely see anything. So in a way, your blinking and field of vision are your health bars. Another interesting mechanic is that time is continuous, and sometimes characters will ask you to be at a certain place at a certain time. Thankfully, you can leave the mansion and future locations by heading to the exit, and you can drive back to the city where you can rest at a hotel, which will replenish your health, but also create a time skip. Or you can buy items and ammo at the local shop, and you can get more money by selling items you find while exploring the game. This is such a weird and unique game that it's honestly not good in the traditional sense, but the jankiness is what makes it fun and unique. Again, it's a lot like Deadly Premonition in that regard. So if you like Deadly Premonition due to how weird and janky it is, I say check it out.
It's dangerous. Let's get out of here.
Steam Hearts is a shmup for the Sega Saturn, although it was originally on the PC 98 and PC Engine. This is a traditional shmup for the Sega Saturn with a lot of story. Honestly, too much story. I have no idea what the plot actually is, because I don't speak Japanese, but man, do the characters spend a lot of time talking. Thankfully, you can skip these, and your ship will speed up to reach the point where the next level should begin. But man, look at how long even that takes. Thankfully, once the game actually starts, things improve dramatically. This is very much a 16-bit shmup with 32-bit 2D graphics, and you know what? That's just how I like them. The game is interesting in that you can combine different power-ups on different parts of your ship. That means that you can go all out on one type of power-up or go half and half with two different weapon styles. I will say that the enemy rate and their fire rate is perhaps a little too high, so if you don't play aggressively, you'll find yourself quickly overwhelmed. On the other hand though, the bosses are super easy, barely an inconvenience. This is one of those games that doesn't set the genre on fire, but if you enjoyed 16-bit shmups, then you'll feel right at home here. And honestly, that's fine by me. Once you beat a stage boss, you get a few suggestive cutscenes where you and your assistant share some, quality time with that stage's boss. Supposedly, the PC 98 versions are even more graphic, but hey, this one ain't bad either. So I say, check this one out.
Lightning.
And there you go, a selection of 32-bit hidden gems that I think you should check out. Are there any games I missed? Let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all my Patreon supporters, including my newest backers, Tony Toon and Pixelman86. Thank you for helping make the channel better. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!